Okay, in this module, we're going to do something a little bit different, and I really want you guys help with this. I debated for a long time as to how to go about best implying or best communicating the information about GMOs. GMOs is something that I am extraordinarily passionate about. I feel it is highly, highly dangerous. And if there's any one nutritional topic that concerns me more than anything, it's the topic of GMOs, because suffice it to say, we are all eating GMOs. And at this point in time, the studies that have been done on genetically modified foods is not a pretty sight. In fact, it is downright scary. And so because of that, I want you guys to understand genetically modified foods in and out. I want you to understand where to find them. I want you to understand what they are. I want you to understand what they do. And I want you to understand, too, why it is that the government is trying to cover up this information and not give it to us, because you and I have every right in the world to know what it is that we are putting into our bodies and how it's harming us. We talk about a lot of negative impacts of bad food in our diets in this class, but if there is any one that has what I would consider the absolute most negative side effect, it's genetically modified foods by and far. And what's so frustrating about this is that it is very difficult to eliminate them from our diets because, as we'll learn later on, they're not labeled. I eat GMOs and I don't even want to. There's basically no way to not eat genetically modified foods unless you eat a completely organic diet. It's one benefit of organics, and it's one reason why some people turn to organics. We will talk about that a little bit later. But what I want to do in this section, because of how strongly I want you guys to really know and comprehend this, I could sit here and I could lecture on it. I could go through the slides with you, but for some reason I just don't feel like it's going to be as beneficial. In my classrooms on campus, I spend an entire class period on this topic. And hopefully by the end I make my students walk away very irate with the government at what they're doing, with the position that they're putting us in, namely that we are human guinea pigs in this big trial in genetically modified foods, foods that every other country will refuse, but here in America we feed ourselves with them. So what I decided to do, and what I'm going to try for this class that I've never done before, is have you guys watch a documentary that has been just newly released in place of my lecturing to you. I thought of this because I just watched this documentary myself about 3 or 4 weeks ago, and it basically covers everything that I talk about in class, but it even goes into further detail. And it just gives you another medium. I think sometimes if you stick to the same medium over and over again, then it gets a little bit boring for class. So my goal is to see if this new medium, if you will, more information, different information, if it makes it more interesting for you, because I really do want you guys interested in this topic. I want you to see how important it is. So at the end of this module, you're going to see a banner for the movie. The movie is Genetic Roulette, and it's basically a video on genetic modification. What is genetically modified foods? How are they being used? And most importantly, how are they impacting us? This DVD goes into all the details of the studies that have been done in the cancer, in the infertility, in the birth defects, and just the cancer, everything that comes from genetically modified foods. And you'll see a lot of the pictures that are used in the DVD are also used in my lecture slides. So again, they're going to go hand in hand pretty well. So you guys can either go to Netflix and find them. You can go to Amazon and rent it for $2.99. There is an abridged version that's only an hour, or there's an hour and a half long, the original version. I would prefer you get the original version if at all possible. I understand some of you will probably get the hour-long abridged version. I have not seen that one, so I don't know what they leave out. But I know in the regular hour and a half one, a lot of the information that's covered is information that I give you as well in the slides, and it will be on the exam. So it's important for you guys to have a good understanding of particularly the side effects of genetically modified foods. So before you guys go and get the video and watch it, first I want to make sure that you understand the ins and outs of what genetically modified foods are and how they come about. So what I'm going to do is real quickly try to explain what a genetically modified food is. If you look at the slide that is up on your computer screen at the moment, we're going to use corn as an example because all corn in the United States, with the exception of sweet corn that you would buy at the store, is genetically modified. So every processed food that has a corn-based ingredient in it, high fructose corn syrup, maltodextrin, any other type of a corn item, is genetically modified. Almost all of our processed foods are genetically modified as a result of corn being genetically modified. So we're going to use corn as the example. When you genetically modify a food, what basically happens is you're going to take the DNA of a different species. Okay, this is one of the important facts that are the important concerns with regards to genetically modified food. The genes are coming from not another plant, but you might be taking the genes of an animal and planting them inside the genes of a plant. So in genetically modified foods, you are mixing DNA, and it is done in a lab. What they've done with corn is they have figured out that there's a bacteria in the soil that contains a certain protein that will break open the stomach of bugs when they eat the bacteria. So the bacteria, in essence, has its own built-in pesticide. So they discovered that this particular trait comes about by a specific gene inside that bacteria. So they isolated the gene in that bacteria and said, well, hey, what if we took that gene and we threw it inside the DNA of corn? And so that's exactly what they did. They extracted that protein out of the bacteria gene, or the gene out of the bacteria's DNA, and then they multiplied the gene, and then they stick it inside the genes of the corn, or the DNA of the corn. So as you can see here with step number 1, we have excluded, or we have cut out our desired gene, which was in the bacteria, the gene that will produce the protein that kills bugs. You have inserted it in step 2 into the corn's DNA. Actually, I'm sorry, in this one, what they're doing is they're using we call this like a replica gene. It's a piece of a DNA that will act to replicate that gene for us. So they first replicate the gene. They make multiple copies of the gene, as you can see down in step 4, and then they will take those and they will shoot them into the corn's DNA, which is what you see down in number 5. So what ends up happening is now you have a corn seed with a DNA that has that desired trait, namely that pesticide, built right into the DNA. That's the essence of what genetic modification is. If we go to the next slide, this is just a cute little cartoon that shows you the exact same process. Half of the problems with genetically modified foods comes from the process. So again, in step number 1, let's see where my arrow is. Here we go. In step number 1 up here, okay, again, you've identified a particular gene. In this case, the gene is in the bacteria. So get the gene out of the bacteria. Step number 2, splice it. We call this splicing. In other words, take it out of that bacteria's DNA, put it into the corn DNA instead. Okay, now this is where the first problem arises. The way they stick this gene into the DNA, it's not a pretty process. It's not a simple process. What they do is in a petri dish, they put a whole bunch of corn DNA. Then they have what does literally look like a gun type device, and they load it with the desired gene, and they shoot it into the petri dish full of corn DNA. So it's very much of a random act. The goal is to hope that the pressure of the whole system implants that desired gene into someplace into that corn DNA so that it can start to function. The problem, when you have a strand of DNA, DNA is made up of multiple genes. So let's say that particular DNA, or that particular gene that we're shooting in there, ends up splitting up a protein that would be another gene in that particular DNA. So you have inserted a desired gene, but you've messed up another gene in the process, because we don't know where this is going to land. It could land anywhere in the DNA. So some of the problems are the fact that by doing that and using that method, you could actually take out certain genes that are important for the corn. You could also be creating new genes and not even knowing it, because as you start to play around with the DNA and change all of the sequencing of the DNA, the messages that are there, You could create foreign messages that we've never seen before. And we're actually starting to see this. One of the problems with GMOs is that it increases food allergies. And one of the reasons why we're thinking that it increases food allergies is because there are new proteins being formed that we've never seen before. And it's because we're messing up the DNA, that we're messing up the genes basically. So now they produce new genes, if you will, or new proteins in the body. So in this particular slide, that's what I want you guys to take note of, is the process in which they're implementing this whole thing. Also, there's a lot of damage done to the DNA in the process, so a lot of mutations can occur. So maybe the problem isn't so much where that desired gene ends up in the DNA, but instead it's just the pressure of the whole system, the pressure of shooting all these new genes into this DNA of the corn, that it damages other parts of the DNA that don't even get the desired gene. And so you create a lot of mutations. And again, you can create foreign proteins, you can mess up things that naturally should be in corn. There's a lot of problems that we just don't know how to control that. So again, putting the gene into the DNA is not a pretty process. And in the process of doing that, can create some major difficulties that we're unaware of, totally unaware of. Okay, this is a slide you guys will see too in the PowerPoint slides. It kind of goes over some of the problems of genetically modified foods. We just discussed this first one right here, and that is the problem of the fact it's an ethical issue, really, that you are taking the genes of one species and you are implanting them into a whole different species. Okay, so they use the example here of putting a strawberry gene into a fish gene. Often GMO foods are kind of called frankenfoods. So one of the more recent genetic modifications is a farmed salmon. They want to try to increase the meat on salmon because fish is known as being healthy for you. So they are going to insert a gene into salmon that makes the meat much heartier. Okay, but again, this gene isn't even, it doesn't come from another salmon. It comes from a plant or some other kind of a species. So the salmon appropriately are called franken salmon, but you don't know if you're eating it because they won't tell you. So that's the first problem. Second problem, as you will see in that video that you watch, is the studies. The studies are scary. Cancer, reproductive problems, hormone problems. I mean, it goes on and on and on, the dangers of GMOs and especially what they've done to animals. Prevalence of GMOs, the United States almost exclusively uses them in a majority of our foods. Almost every other country on this planet has banned the use of GMOs. Now you will see that India has used some genetic modification in their corn, or in their cotton, I mean. In some other countries have used them. When they use them, it's usually less than 10% of their entire agriculture. In our states, it is, or in our country, it's a majority of our agriculture is genetically modified. Public opinion, most people are not in favor of GMOs, but the government has literally shoved them on us and not given us a choice. Labeling, you're going to see in the movie Labeling, the issue did come up. Unfortunately, we were not able to vote on it like what the American people wanted to, completely due to money there. Kraft and General Mills and a lot of your major food producers, PepsiCo, they just poured billions of dollars into the prevention of labeling genetically modified foods, and they won. It was all a battle of money, basically. So those are some of the main concerns. And then when you were talking about the health concerns, this is just a very, very brief overview of different items there. You have what we talked about with a corn is the built-in pesticide or insecticide. So that would be over on this side. We know that that particular gene, when it's inserted into corn, and when animals and humans eat that corn, it causes cancer for sure. A lot of immune problems, a lot of nervous problems, nervous system problems, a lot of genetic and metabolic deficits. Okay, so a lot of conditions related to that. Soybeans are also genetically modified almost exclusively. So if you don't have corn in your processed foods, you have soy in your processed foods. You pretty much can't get rid of either in your diet if you're eating processed foods at all. Both are genetically modified. The thing with soybeans is that they stick a gene in the soybeans that allows the soybeans to tolerate a massive amount of Roundup. It's basically an herbicide that they spray. So now all of our soybeans have a larger amount of this herbicide on them, and this herbicide is very, very toxic to humans. As we are eating foods with the residue of Roundup on them in large quantities, what they have found with that regards is that it's producing a lot of infertility in our country, and a lot of hormonal imbalances as well, a lot of reproductive issues. Now, some agriculture has both genes, both genetically modified genes. It has the gene to tolerate Roundup, and it has the gene to also have its own built-in pesticide. So then you're combining the side effects of both of those too. There's a million different problems associated with that. So this is just a big overview. I want you guys to see that movie. Take notes as you're going along. We will discuss this further for sure. It will be on the exam, and I probably will send out an email or some kind of a survey. I want to get your opinion when we're done to see how well you liked seeing a documentary for a module, and especially in regards to this particular kind of a topic, if it helped or if it didn't. So enjoy.